BBC World Service. It's 13 hours GMT. This is Oliver Conway with the newsroom. Italy's ambassador to Congo is killed in an attack on a UN convoy north of Goma, along with 2 others. We'll have the latest. Also on the newsroom. Hundreds of thousands protest against the coup in Myanmar, defying threats to their lives.
Today is a day for countrywide protests. If we stay under the control of a military dictatorship, we will become their slaves.
A difficult balancing act for the British Prime Minister as he prepares to announce plans to ease the lockdown. A Chinese tea chain apologises over sexist slogans. And later.
It can be read as both a statement of showing his vulnerability, but also showing us the painter who loved to provoke.
New evidence reveals that graffiti on the screen was by Edvard Munch. First, our top stories.
BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. The Italian ambassador to the Democratic Republic of Congo has been killed in an attack on a United Nations convoy in the east of the country. Italy's foreign ministry said Luca Attanasio was shot dead along with an Italian military policeman near the town of Kanyamahoro. Catherine Biarohanga in Nairobi says this is a dangerous region.
The Eastern DRC has a proliferation of armed groups. Some of these are political rebel groups. You also do have militant militia, but you also do have just bandits who target aid workers, tourists, rich people in Eastern Congo. So right now it's really hard to tell what was the reason for this attack. We understand it happened near the Virunga National Park. We're seeing reports from the media there that the park guards got involved to try and stop the attack, and possibly the Congolese army as well.
Hundreds of thousands of people have filled the streets of Myanmar, from its bigger cities to rural townships, in a peaceful display of protest against the 3-week-old military regime. The Burmese authorities, who seized power by ousting Myanmar's elected government, tried to stop the protests, warning on state television that demonstrators risk losing their lives. Military vehicles used as barriers were physically shifted by large groups of protesters so that crowds could pass. The top Chinese official in charge of Hong Kong has pledged to overhaul the territory's political system to stop the participation of those he said were anti-China troublemakers. Pro-democracy candidates who challenged Chinese rule swept local district elections in 2019. Stephen McDonnell reports from Beijing.
Speech by a senior Communist Party official calling for loopholes to be closed to stop anti-China troublemakers entering politics in Hong Kong would appear to show that the Communist Party is preparing to overhaul the city's electoral system. Sha Baolong, the head of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, said improvements to the relevant electoral system should be led by the central government. Changes to the city's voting process could be introduced at the Communist Party's annual rubber stamp National People's Congress, which will meet in Beijing from the end of next week.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is due to announce a gradual relaxation of coronavirus lockdown restrictions in England. The BBC's political editor, Laura Koonsberg, says it will be many months before life returns to anything like normal.
There are 4 steps here back to something like normal, and the gap between them is expected to be 5 weeks. That was insisted on by the government's medical advisors, as I understand it. And if you work all of that through, that means it's going to be early summer before the regulations are rolled back, and that's still conditional on things going according to plan.
News from the BBC. The first real-world results of Britain's vaccination programme indicate it's having a hugely beneficial impact on preventing serious illness. Figures from Scotland found that in the 4th week after the first jab, hospital admissions were reduced by 85% and 94% for the Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccines, respectively. A lead researcher, Professor Aziz Sheikh, called the results spectacular. The Ugandan opposition leader Bobi Wine says he's withdrawing his court case challenging the results of last month's presidential election. Patience Atuhere is in Kampala.
Bobi Wine says that the judges refused to admit extra evidence put before them, which pointed out massive irregularities in the election results. He claims that his party, the National Unity Platform, has video evidence of ballot box stuffing and predict ballots being cast by security forces in some parts of the country. At some polling stations, the final results showed that voter turnout was 100%, which Bobi Wine's team describes as impossible. Official figures show that Bobi Wine lost the election with just over 34% of the votes.
Iran has hailed a visit by the United Nations nuclear watchdog as a significant diplomatic and technical achievement. The two sides reached a deal that allows international inspections to carry on monitoring Tehran's nuclear activities for 3 more months. A court in Belarus has sentenced a 16-year-old boy to 5 years in a penal colony for his alleged role in anti-government riots. Mikita Zalataro has epilepsy, and Radio Liberty reports that on being sentenced, he clutched the cage in which he was held, crying, "Let me out of here." He's reported to have been detained since last August after being in the centre of the city of Gomel as security forces dispersed a rally against election fraud. BBC News.
Thank you very much. You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with Oliver Conway. The area of eastern Congo, which borders Rwanda and Uganda, is notoriously dangerous, homes to armed groups and criminal gangs. Now, the Italian ambassador, Luca Attanasio, has died after a UN World Food Programme convoy there came under attack. 2 others were also killed. They were hit by gunfire in the area north of Goma, a region that includes the UNESCO-listed Virunga National Park. We can talk to our correspondent Catherine Bayaru-Hanga on the line from Nairobi. What more can you tell us about the attack, Catherine, and who may be behind it?
So the first reports we started to receive about this attack were in the middle of around the mid-morning, around 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. And the initial reports mentioned that a World Food Programme convoy travelling near Goma, the city in eastern Congo, had come under attack. 2 people were said to have been killed and that the Italian ambassador was wounded. But shortly after, the reports came in that he'd actually succumbed to his injuries. We understand that he had been evacuated from the point of the attack, taken to a UN hospital, and that's where he succumbed to his injuries.
And what kind of security would a UN convoy have had in this area? Because it is unstable.
The clean feed has gone. I can't hear them. I've been passed on.
And I'm afraid it sounds like we have lost contact with Catherine. We'll try to get her back in a little while. But meanwhile, let's go to Myanmar, because 3 weeks after the coup there, hundreds of thousands of protesters have been defying the military. Since the armed forces took over, 3 people have died and more than 600 have been arrested. But the security forces have so far resisted the kind of bloody crackdown seen in the past. The authorities, though, are warning that protesters risk losing their lives if they carry on. This demonstrator said it was important to take part in the campaign of nationwide strikes.
Today is a day for countrywide protest. We don't want to stay under the control of a military dictatorship. So we came here to join the protest regardless of the salaries we make. Nothing will happen to me if my salary is cut, but if we stay under the control of a military dictatorship, we will become their slaves.
Thompson Chow is editor of Frontier, previously known as the Myanmar Times. He spoke to the BBC from the main city, Yangon.
Well, indeed, there are mass protests happening right now, and resistance efforts have dominated the whole country and the city since the protests began following the coup. But today does feel like it is a lot bigger than before, with a lot of more roads blocked, highways blocked, and shops closed everywhere we go. There has been reportedly a police presence and army presence. I was in a smaller protest outside the UN, one of the UN offices, earlier today. And now I'm near one of the major protests, and you see some of the people started wearing helmets. I think that's in part mainly in response to the shootings over the weekend, where security forces shot and killed several of the protesters. A part of the resistance effort is the civil disobedience movement, kick-started with government doctors. And I think many companies and analysts I've spoken to are now thinking, there's a good chance that the military would find it ungovernable. We're talking about officials at state companies, reporting in tax departments, government doctors, engineers, all going on strike.
Journalist Thompson Chow in Yangon. Well, our Southeast Asia correspondent Jonathan Head has been monitoring events from Bangkok. What does he make of these latest demonstrations?
Well, it shows that people wanted to respond to the call for a general strike and have done so in very, very large numbers. It's not just the numbers. They're very big. They're probably bigger than we've seen up to now. That seems fairly clear to me from the aerial pictures I've seen. But it's the number of different places. I've been in touch with people in really very, very small towns, places no one's heard of, and they've got at least hundreds, if not thousands, out on the streets as well. So this is a nationwide show of defiance against the military, and very much an attempt to show up the military's claims that this is just a bunch of agitators. Now, it's taking the form of a general strike. That means that nearly all commercial activities and certainly all official activities are being badly disrupted, and in some towns there's just nothing happening at all apart from the rallies. But they are in effect an extension of the protests we've seen for the last 2.5 weeks. And the real question is, what do they do after this? It's a great show of force. It will certainly remind those in power how much opposition they face, but it also has a very negative impact on an economy that's already quite fragile. And people will suffer. They don't earn any money. They can't buy supplies while these sorts of activities go on. Can they repeat it? And that's going to be the question for the next few days. What's the long-term strategy?
But the fact that people are willing to resort to this and indeed risk their lives after we've seen those threats from the authorities, is that enough to make the military think again and change course?
We don't know. It's the great mystery. We still don't really know exactly what the dynamics were behind this very dramatic and frankly reckless decision to launch this coup against a government which had just won a resounding majority and had the clear support of huge numbers of people in the country. Even some of the people who've joined the military government must be thinking now, is this a wise decision? Is it viable in the long term? And that's really what this protest movement is trying to show. They're trying to show that the country will in effect be ungovernable because of the enormous amount of anger there is against this coup, unless the military finds a way out. What that way out is very hard to guess, and that will have to be explored by those who have channels of communication to the generals, the Chinese government, perhaps other neighbouring countries, militaries in neighbouring countries who may find it's possible to talk to them. But it's very hard to see a way out. In some ways, the military has boxed itself into this situation, and I think its instincts right now will be just to hold fast and use lethal force when they need to.
Our Southeast Asia correspondent Jonathan Head. Well, let's now return to our top story, the news that the Italian ambassador to Congo has been killed in an attack on a convoy there. We can join Catherine Bayaruhanga. And Catherine, you were telling us about the incident itself. I was just wondering how secure these convoys are, what kind of protection they have, given that the area it was operating in is dangerous.
Well, I've travelled in some of these areas as part of convoys, and usually if it's not too dangerous, you will have armed guards, you will have 4x4 vehicles. But if there is the possibility that you might come under attack, then you're put in armoured vehicles. Now, the question is, for example, what kind of vehicles was the ambassador and his team travelling in? But also, what kind of backup support did they have? Were there plans that, should they come under attack, there would be enough support to repel the attackers? We understand that some of the park guards at the Virunga National Park did get involved to repel the attackers, but right now the big question is, how did this happen?
Catherine, many thanks indeed. Catherine Bayaruhanga in a rather rainy Nairobi. You're listening to the Newsroom from the BBC World Service. Our headlines from Jerry.
As we've been hearing, the Italian ambassador to the Democratic Republic of Congo has been killed in an ambush on a United Nations convoy. Opponents of the military coup in Myanmar have taken to the streets in huge numbers at the start of a general strike. And data from Britain's coronavirus vaccination programme suggests it's having a major effect on preventing serious illness as the government prepares to ease the lockdown.
Yeah, we'll hear more about those easing plans in a moment. But first, a tea shop in China, or rather a tea shop chain in China, has apologised for using sexist language to try to drum up trade. Sexy tea sparked criticism by referring to women as a bargain on its mugs. The chain now says it never intended to disrespect women. Our China media analyst Carrie Allen told us more.
It all started with this company, Sexy Tea, selling what they called Changsha dialect mugs. So they were special mugs that people could buy and they could keep their tea in. And people in Hunan province, which is where this tea shop is famous, in a city called Changsha, they took pictures of these and posted them on the platform Sina Weibo, which is China's version of Facebook or Twitter. And people very much picked up on the language on these mugs, that it said that women were a bargain, and suggested that people could get lucky if they came into these shops because they could pick up a woman while waiting for their drinks.
And it wasn't just one mug, it was on a lot of mugs.
Quite, yeah. So the company has come under criticism before. It's previously sold tea bags with the packaging that had the slogan "Master, I want you" on it, along with an image of what looked like tadpoles but could be interpreted as sperm. And so it's had a reputation before for being quite edgy. And I think this is why this caused such a stir on social media and got a lot of people talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, what else did Sexy Tea say?
Well, they've apologised today. They said that they had absolutely no intention of disrespecting women. And they've also said that they've recalled this batch of mugs and they're going to seriously reflect on this incident. I mean, some people are saying that the company knew what they were doing, the fact that there have been multiple incidents such as this. And the fact that this company is known as Sexy Tea always suggested it was going to be a bit edgy. Its Chinese name isn't Sexy Tea, it's Colourful Tea. So yeah, that it's got people talking about how women are not considered in these discussions. I mean, one of the things that's been a reoccurring theme in recent months are discussions about how a lot of advertising campaigns are male-dominated and they don't think about women. So actually last month there was a facial wipes company that similarly drew scrutiny because it was sexist in its advertising and made clear that the people behind it were men and that they hadn't thought that women might actually backlash and have criticism towards this company.
Our China media analyst Carrie Allen. As US President Donald Trump hoped to withdraw all remaining US troops from Afghanistan, but his successor, Joe Biden, has decided to review the agreements made with the Taliban last year. The deal didn't involve the Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani, and he has now welcomed NATO's move to delay a decision on withdrawing troops. President Ghani has been speaking to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette.
The NATO decision provides a window of opportunity to accelerate the peace process, to shape an enduring, just, and lasting peace. We have a sense of urgency. We have put a lot of things on the table. We've done a lot, and we've sacrificed a tremendous amount. It is time that Taliban and their supporters show the same will for seeking peace as they've demonstrated in seeking conflict.
Your National Security Advisor, Hamdullah Mohib, says that you need at least 2 more years before you can stand on your own.
We need support, but
how many is it a question of months or years before the last of the NATO forces and crucial assets like air support, intelligence, logistics?
Sure. The fundamental issue, let us return back. Are we talking about conditions of war or conditions of peace?
Well, let's talk war right now. Because,
if it's conditions of war...
How long do your forces...
I suggest those who provide sanctuary to the Taliban should be talked to very straight. The international community should not need to sacrifice in blood and treasure.
There's a new president in the White House. Are you relieved?
I'm pleased.
Relieved?
I'm pleased.
Relieved because it may be more predictable now?
No, I'm pleased that we are going to have a predictable process, a process of partnership. I'm delighted with the nature of conversation that's taking place between us. It is a conversation about mutual interest, mutual respect, and mutual trust. There are going to be hard decisions, and one has to expect them. The American war is over.
If President Biden called you and said, Mr. President, we believe we have a peace deal now and a ceasefire. I'm asking you for peace, to stand down, to find a way within the Constitution to stand down early so that in the interest of peace and stability. What would you say?
I have one criteria, holding of elections.
Early elections.
Elections.
But do you fear a Taliban military takeover?
No. They've not been able to achieve any of their two aims for the last 6 years. Either to bring the government down, finish our security forces, or second, divide Afghanistan geography into two.
Well, because you've had NATO air support, you've had intelligence.
Whatever we
when
have
that goes, it'll be a different game.
No, look, Madam Dus, all of those, if we didn't have the will, this is not Vietnam. This is not a government that is collapsing.
The Afghan President Ashraf Ghani talking to Lise Doucette. Slow march to freedom and return to the great outdoors. That's how the headline writers here have previewed this afternoon's announcement due from the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on easing the lockdown in England. The entire UK has been under a third full lockdown since the beginning of January. The country has one of the highest number of deaths and recorded coronavirus cases in the world, though in recent weeks those figures have fallen. We can talk to our political correspondent Rob Watson. Rob, what can we expect from Boris Johnson?
C word, caution, because despite the undoubted success of the vaccine programme here and despite the fact that hospitalisations, deaths and infection rates are going down, they're all still high. And because, of course, Boris Johnson is the leader of a government that was widely criticised for being too slow to lock down at the start of the pandemic almost a year ago and to release earlier lockdowns too early. So Boris Johnson tweeted, I think, on this earlier today, and just in a short tweet he used the C word, caution or cautious, twice.
Yeah, he doesn't want to have to perform another U-turn, but he's under pressure to go faster than he wants to by his own MPs, or some of them at least.
He is, absolutely. There is certainly a wing of the governing Conservative Party, what you might be called a libertarian wing, that has tended to think all along that the cure for COVID, if you like, of lockdowns is worse than the illness in terms of the economics. And I think actually one of the reasons why Boris Johnson is taking a cautious approach is to be able to turn round to this group of MPs and say, look, we don't want to have any more lockdowns. Look, if you kind of stick with me on this, hopefully we will be able to maybe by the end of the summer get back to something approaching normal.
Now, the figures are going down, but is it that the result of the lockdown which has kept people at home, or is it the vaccines which are being rolled out?
I think on the vaccines, people aren't quite sure yet. And I think that's why the government is still crunching the data. They've been looking at the data from Israel. But I don't think anybody is in any doubt. Certainly the epidemiologists are not in any doubt that absolutely the lockdown is what's certainly having an effect.
Yeah, and how is the vaccine going? Quite a lot of people have had it, like a third of adults or something?
Yes, it's astonishing. I mean, you might say it's in sort of stark contrast where everyone was looking at the UK around the world in March last year saying, what on earth has gone wrong with Britain? It's supposed to have this incredibly sophisticated state. It's a rich country. What on earth has gone wrong? But Britain's a very highly nationalised health system. The National Health Service has actually been remarkable at getting through a task like this, which is getting the supply of vaccine. And, of course, credit will go to those who decided to take risks on punting, on ordering all those vaccines before it was known that they would definitely be effective. So I guess it's a combination of the government's putting its money where its mouth was and betting on these vaccines, and having a highly centralised health system has sort of delivered the goods, and the opinion polls suggest that British people are remarkably happy to take them.
Rob Watson, thank you. Now let's get a quick look at what else is happening in the world with Jerry.
Mozambique's former health minister, Helder Martins, has resigned from the government's COVID-19 task force, citing bad leadership and a lack of consultation. He accused the government of ignoring the task force's advice and sometimes not asking for its opinion on COVID-19 matters, including on the reopening of bars and casinos, which he said led to a rise in virus cases. Health Minister Armindo Tiago says that he respects Mr. Martins' decision to leave and the team will continue with its mandate. Prince William has said that his grandfather, Prince Philip, is okay after spending a 6th night in hospital in London. He also said the doctors are keeping an eye on the Duke of Edinburgh, who's 99. The reason for his admission to hospital hasn't been given, but it's not thought to be coronavirus related. And people who wear spectacles could be up to 3 times less likely to be infected by coronavirus, according to a new study from India. It shows that long-term wearers rub their eyes less and, as a result, reduce their risk of picking up the virus. Researchers found participants touched their face up to 23 times each hour on average, and their eyes 3 times per hour.
Now it's one of the most famous images in the world of art. A person with their head in their hands, their mouth wide open against a swirly background. There are 4 versions of The Scream by Edvard Munch. On one of them, in the top left-hand corner in tiny writing, are the words, "can only have been painted by a madman." So who wrote them? Well, tests carried out by the National Museum of Norway have now confirmed they were put there by the artist himself. May-Britt Guleng told my colleague Justin Webb how they came to that conclusion.
We had infrared photos taken. This made it much easier for us to compare his handwriting, the handwriting of the inscription, to that of Munch's from letters and notes. And because the inscription is quite small and it's not easy to read.
For many years, though, experts in Munch have believed, haven't they, that it was him?
Yes, but they never had an explanation of why. I think what's also new to us is that we have a context for how and when he wrote it.
Are we saying then that it wasn't written when the actual painting was completed? It was sometime later?
It was 2 years later, because the painting is from 1893. It was exhibited in Berlin, where Munch lived, but then he took an exhibition to Oslo and had it on display there, and it caused a lot of uproar. That was in 1895, and he was accused of not having a normal brain. One medical student called Johann Scharfenberg, he even accused him of being abnormal and degenerated.
So saying it in a way that would really have hit home to someone who did have mental illness in his family.
That's correct, because his younger sister Laura had been hospitalized just 3 years earlier, and she was seriously ill, and there was also other hereditary diseases in his family, and melancholy. His father was sometimes melancholic and depressed, so Munch was really worried about this. So the writing on the painting, he took control of how people perceived him and also how he understood himself. And it can be read as both a statement of showing his vulnerability, but also showing us the painter who loved to provoke. But he was also very much hurt by the accusation, and he didn't really agree, because in his later notes, he wrote several times that those who thought he were mad, they didn't understand art.
May-Britt Guleng from the National Museum of Art in Oslo. Our main news again, the Italian ambassador to the Democratic Republic of Congo has been killed in an ambush on a UN convoy. In the past hour, the Italian President Sergio Mattarella has condemned what he described as a cowardly attack. The Italian Republic is in mourning for these servants of the state who lost their lives, he said in a statement, offering deepest sympathy and solidarity with the families of Luca Attanasio and those of a policeman, Vittorio Iacovacci, and a driver who died in the attack north of Goma. We'll have a summary next, but that's it for now. From the newsroom.